I'm Kimball DeLaMare. I'm a clinical social worker that's been in this field for over 25 years. My wife thinks that because I'm working with adolescents, because I'm fixated at that stage of development. So as the presentation goes on, just keep that in mind. Jackie was a school counselor at Granite School District for 14 years, and then has now been in private practice for many years since then, is not fixated at this stage of development, and so I have another mother figure up here to help me as we go through the day. Our session today is going to be focusing on some strategies, some signs, some symptoms, some effects of pornography as they impact on adolescents. In our work with adolescents, we're seeing in more and more treatment centers around the United States, kids that were placed there in the past for self-harm reasons, for oppositionality, for heavy addictions, are now having co-addictions with pornography. So Jackie and I, along with LifeStar, Jill Manning that was introduced earlier, helped to develop a program called Youth Star, piloted a program for kids. It's a series of groups helping kids be able to learn about the addictive cycles, what they can do to start to combat that when they get into those traps that pornography so viciously and effectively affects our kids with. And so we went out to the Westridge Academy and were able to pilot some groups with one group of girls and one group of boys. And over a period of about 3 months, we met with them weekly. In those sessions, we found that most of the girls had some situation where they were molested or fondled as they were younger kids. Many of them become highly promiscuous and found that to be very powerful for them, but also extremely lonely. Some of the boys we saw were very socially maladjusted. They looked very harmless, but had become very involved with pornography, perhaps as a way of trying to connect themselves into life. So as these kids came into these sessions, they were very quiet until about the second session. You'll find that girls will talk your ear off. The boys, it's like pulling nails out of hardwood. It's hard to get them to do anything. So as we focused on these kids, we found that some of the strategies we had were very effective. A couple of things that we wanted to do with them provided us the content for today's session. We're hoping that there might be about 4 things we can focus on that you can take away from this today. We want you to get a little more education so you can educate youth that you work with, whether they're your own kids or kids that you have some responsibilities for. We want you to identify some of the key signs of pornography use when it comes to adolescence. We want you to understand the effects that it has on adolescents and familiarize yourself with some ways to work with teens who may be struggling with this.
The reason why pornography is the most addictive thing in the universe is that it allows a man to feel like a man without requiring him to be one.
What we wanted to do real quickly before we go into some of the specific things that we found too in our pilot program was just to kind of do a real quick review, since we're assuming that those that are here are either working with adolescents in some form or another, or are parents of adolescents, or going to be parents of adolescents, or whatever. So just as a reminder, and just a real quick revisiting so that we're on the same page, is that I had a 16-year-old come through my door the other day, and as he comes through, he's 6'2", a huge basketball player. He looks easily 21, and he comes and sits down, and as he's talking, I thought to myself, it's real easy to get confused at this point because he's talking the talk, but he's not walking the walk at all yet, or at least in a lot of ways. And I think as either parents or as adults working, a lot of times we get confused because they look like adults. And so that there's kind of sometimes that expectation that they're going to be able to walk the walk as well as the talk. So they're just in that developmental stage a lot of times as far as that moving through that, trying to use words. I liken it to a lot of times to when you go and try on clothes. If you try on, so men or women both can wear jeans. So you go and try on a pair of jeans, and there's a huge room of jeans, and you're going to go ahead and try them on. And when you try them on, you kind of look and, oh, this isn't quite right, or this kind of baggy, or this is kind of too tight, or whatever. And that's exactly what we find, when you are working, as you find with adolescents, is that they're trying on, they're individuating, they're separating from parents, they're trying to figure out, who am I? And so it's a lot of this trying things on, either verbally or even trying it experientially and then saying, does this fit for me or doesn't it? For instance, we found, it was fun because Kimball was facilitating the girls group and I was facilitating the boys group at the pilot program that we were doing. And I find that is an extremely powerful model because it's nice to have both a man and a woman co-facilitate in both of those situations because they need to see that both a woman and a man can be really healthy and right there with you and enjoy them as you're getting acquainted with those adolescents. The other thing that you find, since they're talking the talk a lot, but they're not necessarily walking the walk, is that this is a time, obviously too, developmentally, that you find that they're extremely susceptible to media. And they really believe, remember how passionate adolescents are. I mean, this is really, when you think about it, these are the ones that change the world. These are the ones that go into revolutions. These are the ones that really go and fight our battles in so many ways. So they're passionate. And so they get quickly sucked into the media. So it was interesting as we started working with them, and as I listened, it was interesting because what this segues into is that one of the things that we were especially concerned about is that they understand the difference between what the lies that pornography tells themselves. Because exactly what we heard this morning from Tuman and some others is the problem is a lot of times they'll start watching, and as you already know, they're being introduced to pornography, or at least to the internet with a lot of different things. They're being exposed and sexualized at a much younger age, when they're between sometimes 7 to 10 years of age. They don't understand what's going on, and so whatever they see or hear, they believe. And as you know, developmentally, Piaget, who talked about developmentally, that in those years, that's a concrete state. And mentally, they're concrete. It's good, bad, black, white, right, wrong. There's not that ambiguity, what's going on. And so that's so important as we work with them to realize where they're at, what they're struggling with, and then to give them really correct information. So one of the things that, even though you'll have on your handouts, and by the way, one of the things that was stated is that the handouts, if we don't have enough, that it will be right on the website in 2 to 3 days, Jill told us, so you can download those print those off. But we have kind of a list real quickly.
Do you want me to run that vignette again?
Yes, please. So I'd like you to watch this vignette one more time, because some of the things, I'm just going to hit 3 lies that pornography, our adolescents, really don't get. And because most of the time, the very first thing before he shows you this is one of the myths is that pornography is natural. All the guys watch it, and sometimes girls now too. So it's not only natural, but it's not addictive. And so it's what everybody does, and it doesn't affect us in any way. So watch this again.
The reason why pornography is the most addictive thing in the universe is that it allows a man to feel like a man without requiring him to be one.
If you listen to those words, to feel like a man without having to be one. Pornography is a cheat. It's important for our kids to understand that it's a cheat. I like that term. Billy Crystal used that when he talked about comics that have to use bathroom humor to try and get a laugh. He says that's a cheat. They're not really working at their craft. And pornography is a cheat.
Yeah. One of the things we specifically talk about in our groups is the fact that one of the myths that they don't realize is the fact that that pornography doesn't really affect the way that you look at the opposite sex, and that that it's very realistic. And so one of the things that, and I don't know, I would recommend 2 books that are just outstanding. I don't know whether Jill's in here right now or not, but Jill Manning, who you saw introduced earlier, wrote probably one of the most impressive to me adolescent book, and actually a book for anybody that's working with adolescent. It's called what's the big deal about pornography? And what we've liked about it so much as we've been working with it is at the end of each chapter it has specific questions that after you've read it and talked to your adolescent about, then there are questions that you can you don't have to make them up. They're right here, and you can kind of use that to facilitate your talking with them and to work through that. So this has been really helpful. Let me read, though, one of the things, because this is the information that we need to give our young people. For instance, one of the things that we talked about was the fact of, it doesn't affect me at all if I watch pornography. And I like to quote that there's this photographer that was extremely well known and did beautiful work. And he said that he had gotten into the habit at a very young age of watching pornography. And he goes on to say, at first he felt great about his pornography fests, but he began to feel gross afterwards. His worldview started to skew, and deadly for a photographer, his sense of the sublime faded. He goes on to say that more than anything else, it was making me jaded. I wasn't finding pleasure in the little things, either with women or with life in general. Things that used to be erotic bored me. And that's what's so important, is for them to start understanding that at first it's really exciting. And you can count on at first that's what's going to happen. But for them to start understanding that that's not what continues on. And then what's really interesting as they start to learn, especially those that sometimes will have men that will either say it on a tape or whatever, but we'll let them know that if the pornography goes on, that a lot of times what will happen is they'll be married and they would rather do pornography than be with their wife sexually. And to the point where they don't even get excited with their wife. And so that's kind of like unbelievable to a 13 or 14 or 15-year-old guy. And so they need to understand so many times that there are these myths that are presented, and so that they can understand the reality, the difference. And when they're taught these things, it was interesting because one of the boys turned to us and said, I said, what's one of your goals? And he said, I really want to know how to have a good relationship with a girl, how to date. Because he had only known how to become sexual with a girl on a date. He didn't even know how to interact with her. So these are some of the things that have been very powerful.
We saw that with 12 out of the 12 girls that we did the pilot group with. Every single one of them only knew how to have a relationship that was based on sex or flirting or exhibitionism, something of that sort. And they basically said when we were done with the coursework, well, we've learned a lot what not to do, but can we have some more weeks on how we can have these relationships? And so we launched in some other interrelationship pieces, just with about eye contact and being able to actually ask questions of somebody about what their hobbies are, their interests, was foreign to them. It was who's hooking up with whom. As our kids understand more about these lies, and we give them the counterintelligence, if you will, it can have some powerful impacts. Each time there have been well-done drug and alcohol advertisements showing the effects of particular drugs. When cocaine really came on big, there were some ads that slowed down the use of cocaine. When speed came on, there were ads that slowed down the use of speed. Every time there's education about the impact on these things, our kids are bright enough to be able to start to make some of those connections and slow down. And so one of your best tools is to let kids know that these are lies. Did you know that the most powerful and most satisfying sexual relationship is in a long-term monogamous relationship? That those that have multiple partners, there's a one-to-one ratio of the chances of their divorce. If I have 2 out of wedlock or premarital contacts, I'm going to almost double my chances of a divorce. If I have 3, I'm going to increase them. If I have 4, they get way up there. And as kids find out this information, they're better equipped, just like with the drug and alcohol ads. So this information needs to be to them in talks that you talk to them about.
And before I finish, as he's finishing that, one of the other things that is really important to understand is, I have another quote from Anna Bridges, who was in Princeton doing some specific research on pornography, found out that, and I don't know if you have this up, if you have one of those up here, but nearly half of, she did a recent content analysis of 50 best-selling adult videos. And what she found is that nearly half of the 304 scenes analyzed contained verbal aggression, while over 88% showed physical aggression. But I think the most alarming thing that she found is that women were overwhelmingly portrayed as the victims of aggression, and that from this, that 87% of acts that were committed against women, that these were viewed from the victim's standpoint as pleasurable or neutral. And that's the part that they don't understand, is that on a video or on the internet, they're seeing this and the women are acting like this is wonderful and fun or pleasurable, or they don't care. And so they get extremely skewed in their in the way that they view women and objectify in different ways. So that is one of our concerns.
As kids are exposed to pornography, it elicits a tremendous biological response. You saw this food coloring that Jackie just put into this container here. When we worked with the kids, we got a large piece like that, poured in a little food coloring, and said that's what happens in your brain when this starts to hit. Endorphins kick in, oxytocin kicks in, or dopamine kicks in, adrenaline can kick in. There are a lot of different substances that can interact. These kids are pretty good science kids, and they can understand some of the neuroscience as you walk them through that. What's interesting is that you stay charged in that state for at least a 20, 30-minute period. We've all been told don't reason with a drunk. There's probably 20 minutes after somebody's exposed to something that's very powerfully arousing that person is still keyed up by that before they're finally calming down. For kids, if they're in a situation and they start to engage in it, even if they look away, they're pulled back to that over that next several minutes' time. We'll talk a little about how to counteract that in a few minutes. So she just put in some Clorox here. We'll see if our experiment works today. So you'll see if this fades over about 20 minutes, but that's a chunk of time. Common signs of pornography use. I was down in Utah County with a colleague. We were with a school counselor in a middle school. We asked her what she thought was the number one problem at their middle school. And she said it used to be drugs and alcohol. She says by far and away it's pornography. We heard that from several other school counselors. What do you mean that it's pornography? Is this in the hallways or what? No, we have kids that aren't even showing. They're sleeping through classes. They're preoccupied in hallways. They're disconnected from our activities. They're not even involving. We have lots of kids that won't do any of their homework because they're so enmeshed, so involved with this as they're going along. These signs here, I got to give you a little bit of a disclaimer on them. Withdrawing from friends and family. Well, when my girl hit about 13, she kind of went off with the 13-year-olds for a while. We'd go up to her room to talk, and the door would be closed. She was up late at night. In the morning, it was rough to get her up in the morning. She's 27 now, but her concentration school seemed there. I mean, I've got a 7th grader right now, and it's like, John, he goes, huh? Looks over at me, it's like, oh. You know, and it's like, John, you got to do this. Oh, I don't want to do that. So he had an increase of moodiness and irritability. He's sometimes a little disrespectful, maybe a little more aggressive. So I may be describing a regular old adolescent here. But if those things are coming on and you're seeing them in bigger doses than you thought you ought to be seeing, please keep that in mind. Now, the decreased sensitivity towards the value system ends up being a bigger differentiator with these kids. Their irreverence about sexuality and relationships. The jokes now in a hallway at a church service or even in front of an adult about somebody's back end or their breasts or about some other kid's size, or these things start to happen and they're giggling. And it's not just 1 or 2 jokes. It's talking in front of people almost as if, you know, we would be embarrassed to say those things, but they'll be saying those things sometimes outright because they're becoming increasingly desensitized and aren't noticing these things. No more eye contact. They're only looking at cleavage, or they're trying to look up a girl's dress, or they're just preoccupied that way. They don't look you in the face anymore. Obviously, that ends up being a huge piece. The sexual innuendos there. The sexual behavior, they're more involved with somebody, they're more secretive with things. The computer and the phone, great presentation that we just had here earlier about how accessible pieces are now. We're particularly concerned about phone as it's becoming a little more difficult for us to control as well as parents. Kids that are reactive and anxious when you come in the room. Now that could be with a regular old adolescent, but when they're really having some reactions to pieces there. A big drop in academics and extracurricular activity. If they're gaming for hours on end, if they're on that computer, if they're up late at night, all of those things are huge signs. Now kids rationalize through all of those things and are very difficult sometimes. So if you're talking to a kid about these things, the more granular you are with time, date, the actual activity, seems like you've been disrespecting your mom, is way different than last night when you called your mom the B word in front of your sister right when you got home from school. That's a far different way to talk to a kid about things. The more descriptive we are about that behavior, the more educated they are about what they are actually doing. Common sense parenting that Boys Town developed many, many years ago finds that if you merely describe a kid's behavior accurately in a neutral tone, that the tendency of a kid to do destructive, self-destructive behaviors and negative behaviors towards others decrease. It's been played out in many of their studies and verified, and it's rather dramatic how that can happen. Money issues ends up being a huge piece for these kids. Decreased self-confidence. These last two are telltale. A kid's really, he's active in his church, and he got hooked into pornography, and now he's looking at it all the time, and he's embarrassed about it. He doesn't feel comfortable telling anyone about this. Maybe if I'm really doing some great stuff with this thing, and I'm reading a whole bunch of scriptures, and if I'm doing these things, and I'm praying a lot, and I'm really taking this, we need to have family night right now. Everybody needs to come in the room. And he turns into a little bit of what a friend of mine calls a fervert. You start to think maybe this could be on that other side because he's trying to heal himself in some ways. The avoidance of church activities and discussions, and this is dumb, and starting to move away from it. It's hard to be in something that doesn't support your value system, and so kids will tend to separate from those pieces.
The next thing that I think is just very critical to look for if you're concerned about wanting to pick up is always look for extremes. And when we're looking for extremes, let's not just stop at the adolescents. Because what I have found is that as I've worked with parents as well as the adolescents, and I'm sure for those of you who are in the audience and have worked too, is that you find sometimes it's the parents that are that are kind of modeling for these, and we'll talk a little about that later on, but are modeling for their children how they live in the extremes. And so, for instance, when I had a parent who came in the other day, and he and his wife were sitting there, and he just said to me, I said, well, how? He said, my son came in and said, I think my girlfriend's pregnant. And I said, how did you handle that? He said, I had to leave the room because I was going to just yell at him and call him every name under the book. And his wife started to cry, and I turned, to find out what's that about. And she said, what were the tears about for her? And she said, that's how he handles everything. It's either that he can't control his emotions and he just rants and raves at my son, or he withdraws and can't talk at all to him. And so it's those extremes that we want to look personally at ourselves as adults. Do we tend to kind of do that? Or what happens is, again, I had a 16-year-old, I'll call all of these names, or whenever we use them, we just use a random name for confidentiality. But I had a girl, Heidi, who came in, 16 years of age, and her mother had come in to see me for a couple of times because she said, my daughter just is out of control. And I said, well, tell me what the problem is. 16-year-olds out of control, that doesn't seem to be too inconsistent in general. But she said, we've given her, she said, she knows that both of us have to work just to make things, go. And she said, we've worked really hard at providing her at least a car that she can get to school and back. And she said, it's not like some of her friends. It's not gorgeous, but she said it's certainly nice enough to get there and get back. And she said, but she absolutely has tantrums and keeps telling me that I need to get her like a Mini Cooper or a BMW or something like her friends. And I said, And then she said, to the point where she literally will start throwing things around the house and slamming things around and getting in my face and starting to threaten me. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. No, we don't do that one. She said, well, what can I do? I said, you call the police. I call the police? No. I said, oh, yes, we call the police. Well, we had that discussion, and I really didn't believe she could ever pull that off because she herself was having problems with boundaries. But what was fascinating is the very next day she called and said, I called the police last night. And they came and they talked to her specifically about how out of control she was. And then finally she came back in. And that is exactly what I find with a lot, exactly what Kimball was talking about, is we find not just a little bit of a mood swing, but when you start seeing real mood swings, when you see extreme behaviors, and then trying to be really good here, and then all of a sudden you find this other, there's something inherent, there's something going on, something that needs to be addressed. And so that's something that you want to kind of keep all the way from that kind of emotionality and not able to control her emotions and being overreactive, to the other one that I had in my group. And that was one of the boys, his name was James, or whatever we want to call him. And I found him totally detached. And part of it was that he, in our group, he just had a hard time staying there mentally. The others would be engaged, would talk, but he somehow was just always disengaged, kind of detached from the rest. And we found out that he before had a real problem with pornography. And so he just got into that detaching situation, found himself not enjoying socially being with anybody. And that's another key thing that we watch, is that inability to socialize and wanting to engage and to become involved socially with those. So.
One rule of thumb that you may look at if it's a kid that's in your own house and you've gradually gotten to where you're tolerating more and more of the out-of-control behaviors, is say, if this was Billy down the street doing this with his family, what would I think of Billy? If you put yourself outside of your own house situation, sometimes like, whoa, I would not be tolerating that at all, and that might be a reality check. It's a gradual way that we end up sometimes lured into tolerating behaviors that we would not have even thought possible a year and a half earlier. It also takes some guts to be able to call kids on these kinds of behaviors and call the police, or to just know that I'm going to be having a tantrum from this kid for the next 2 days. I think I'll go real quick about Skinner. You know, Skinner, and everybody had this B.F. Skinner stuff, psychology class, where they would put the pigeon in the box, and that little lever over in the corner, and if the pigeon would hit the lever, it'd get a piece of grain. So it would walk around in the box and finally see it, peck it, and get the grain. Well, next time it came to that box, it would go right over to that lever, peck it, and get its grain. If I stop the grain coming, does the pigeon stop its behavior immediately? What does it do? It increases its behavior. That's a term called extinction burst. It's just pecking the crap out of that thing for a while. Is that okay? Say it at the coalition conference. So there are times where
You've worked too long with adolescents.
Yeah, I've worked too long with adolescents, so I'm fixated at that stage.
Yeah.
So, but we need to keep that in mind. We ask a kid to stop a behavior, and they increase the behavior dramatically. That actually means that we're getting through to them. The worst thing we do at that time is now cave 2 days later. Now we've taught them that they need to pitch their fit for at least 2 days to get their way. So you've got to hold the line. That goes for Boy Scout Masters, which I am right now with the kids at Antelope Island 2 weeks ago. Prevention. This week, my 5th grader went to her maturation program. out at Muir Elementary in Bountiful, and Davis County is a pretty safe place, and there's some naivete, and we're very grateful for that climate there. And when they got to the period stuff, she was down with her eyes and kind of not looking. Her friend Jane says, "It's okay, it's just the circle of life." And so we had to, my wife had walked her through it a couple times, but it was just out of the realm of her understanding. But she could talk to her mom about those things. We were glad that she's that naive at that age. We're really grateful for that, but she's got to be prepared as things hit. So we've got, first, in terms of healthy sexuality, we've got to make it a safe place for kids to talk through these kinds of discussions. If we're not regularly talking to them, we can't sit down and do the talk. It's just too awkward. It's like, this must be a huge, huge thing, because now Dad's actually sitting talking to me without the TV on watching ESPN Sports Center. Or Mom's doing, she got off the phone and she's not taking care of something else. It's triple tasking. She's actually sitting here just with me. We have to have those just with me moments regularly to set a climate for these kids. We've got to be in a situation, too, to where their comments are valued. Active editorializing is something that is a very powerful way to slow down these things. It's educating these kids about the lies that pornography sells and tells. An ad comes on for beer, and it's like, isn't it interesting that this guy ran out of his job, and suddenly there's a huge party with all of these women that are half his age, and he's happy? Can you imagine what it's like when he's going to go back to work? When kids hear you talking about those ads and just blowing holes in them, they become more savvy consumers and start to detect those lies themselves. It's crucial for us to editorialize. We've got to have more than one mumble talk. John, I guess we ought to talk about this stuff from what you saw at the school. We should not be mumbling about these things. If we're not comfortable about it, maybe we better rehearse talking about these things a few times and start increasing that relationship with our kid. How many talks about the birds and bees do you think we ought to have in a kid's lifetime coming up to marriage? How many think just that one in 5th and 6th grade? How many think that we got to have at least 2 of them? How many think 3? We got one hand for 3. The rest of you think we need at least 4 or more? That's an excellent group here. And how many of you have, all of you who have not had 4 or more, raise your hand. Yeah. I have not had 4 with John to this point in time, but there needs to be one just about their equipment. Kids need to be able to use those terms when they're first coming along in life. Our neighbors just did that because Lizzie came across the street while my boys were playing basketball, and I was out with them and said, "Kimball, you got a penis, huh?" And I said, "Yeah, I do, Lizzie." And she said, "Yeah, and I got a vagina." And
She's 3.
yeah, she's 4.
Oh, 4.
And John and his friends were just like, "Whoa." But she has those right terms. And I tried to be as natural as I could in that situation. If I'd freaked out about that stuff and had gone over to their family and wanted to have a big talk about Lizzie, suddenly this becomes this huge, scary kind of a thing. And it also was an opportunity for a lot of curiosity. When kids are bored, even if they've been traumatized in sexual situations, they'll seek back a mood swing. Some people are like, how come I get preoccupied with this when I had such a terrible experience with this with my uncle? Well, it ends up being so out of the ordinary that some kids, when they're in lousy situations, will go back to traumatic situations just because of the adrenaline that kicks in or the other chemical changes in their body. Just like a heroin addict goes back to their heroin even though it's ruined their life. Paraphrase feelings. For the boys in group, if I were in your shoes, I'd probably be feeling really embarrassed about that or disappointed about what Tom was doing. Of course, I may be way out to lunch, but is that kind of how it is? Yeah, I guess. At least he came out with some feelings by taking my paraphrasing. As we paraphrase and describe what those feelings might be if we were in their shoes, it empowers them to start to be able to assess themselves and better equip themselves from bad situations that hit them. Some of my best work as a counselor over the years has been taking a walk with a kid or shooting some hoops with a kid or trying to figure out how to macrame, which I still have not done. But as I was being taught to macrame, suddenly a girl that would not talk to me otherwise, it's flowing. When you do a sit-down talk in your study and you haven't ever done one of those, and now we want to talk about feelings, talk about setting them up. Those conversations when they're coming in late at night. Dave Erickson, a friend of mine, knows my neighbor Clark Campbell. And Clark, he would stay up till 1 in the morning till his young adult kids got in and have his talks then. And sometimes it would be till 2:30 because that was the only time he could really get his talk. So you've got to be planful and intentional about how to do these things to set yourself up to be preventative. They're not going to listen if you don't have open dialogue. Look how this is clearing up.
Yes, I was good. Do you want to talk about that right now?
No,
or
I think
okay.
we'll move in.
Do that. Okay. Yeah, notice, and this has only been less than 20 minutes. Notice the difference in the color already, and we'll kind of talk about that in just a minute as far as how that goes. One of the things that we just talked about a few minutes ago was extreme. And one of the things we see is there is a consistency, there's a correlation between families that live in extremes and those that have sexual problems or other addictions or other compulsive behaviors. So we're going to look at, if you want to do that, one of the things we look at is it's called the circumplex model. And what it does is it looks both at cohesion in a family as far as either disengaged on one end of the spectrum and enmeshed where the person doesn't even know who they are individually. They're just so enmeshed in the family. And that's the cohesion part or issue that people will look at in some families. The other part that they look at is adaptability. And they see, is a family kind of flexible? Can they handle situations? Or do they find that this person, it's my way or the highway, and this is the way it is? All the way from that end of the spectrum to the other one, which is chaotic, which there aren't many rules, and it doesn't matter when you get home or when you don't, and they're very permissive probably, those kind of parents, on the other end of the spectrum. What we find is that 77%, and that's one figure, I'm sure that there are other studies that have been done, but about 77% of the sex addicts have come from this end of the spectrum, where the parents are both rigid and disengaged. And what we're going to do is show you a little clip, because what I want you to do is, it's a clip from the Great Santini, and I don't know, how many of you have seen that? Great Santini, da-da-da, okay. What I want you to do is look at, this is a family, you'll see the scene in the kitchen, and what you're going to do is you're going to find that there's a girl who's just gotten straight A's, there's the boy who's bouncing his basketball, and then there's a girl who's desperately trying to engage her dad. And then listen also to what the mother is saying. So pick up as much as you can. We're hoping that it's loud enough that you can hear as you're watching this clip, to watch and see where you think on this spectrum that this scenario is taking place, and why perhaps there might be the kind of reaction that you're getting.
You got any goals?
Okay. How did you feel as you were watching that? There was what I hope that you can pick up from this one, and it's obviously very opposite to what we're going to try to show you right now, is that sense of safeness. Did you notice how comfortable she feels? But he asks her a lot of questions. He wants her to look at things. I'm going to show you a video right now.
I have to
We'll
go
get the
find the
popcorn.
scene, so you keep talking.
Okay.
And this is two social workers with
Give us a break.
digital equipment up here. So.
That's right. I'm going to talk about this real quickly because we may not have time.
Yeah, and you know how many social workers it takes to change a light bulb?
That's right.
Only one, but the light bulb has got to want to change.
That's right. Really bad, that's right. Okay, one of the things also that when we talk about parenting or whatever, whoever's working with adolescents, whoever's working with adolescents, it's extremely important that you help give them some coping skills on how to calm themselves down, on how to decompress, all the way from just simply basic deep breathing or whatever to going out and walking or running when they get frustrated. But that is one of the biggest problems I see with adolescents today. They do not know how to calm themselves down. They just use all different kinds of things to avoid pain. So one of the things we teach, and the reason we did this, is we wanted to show them that within nanoseconds, that the drug goes into your system when you're on the internet, and within truly nanoseconds, and you're all of a sudden distracted and you're into this. And that it actually takes, as Kimball said, 20 to 30 minutes to calm yourself down. So we show them how long, we show them ways that they can do that, and it makes a difference. Okay, let's watch this real quickly. You know, I'd like to say this is really extreme, and it does look that way, but I think in a little bit more moderate way, this is going on all the time in different families, different ways. So this is something to really look at as we're working with adolescents.
Did you see that girl with the straight A's? Just the spirit went out of her. She sat there disconnected from that family and now doing her homework upstairs. There are times where we're so involved with the kid with the pornography stuff that we forget about our others and don't give them that time. That's crucial for them to also have that attention as we go along. There are many ways that we can intervene with kids as we go along, but as paraprofessionals, who I think a lot are in this audience, there are times where we need to refer. When those extremes are persistent, when we've done editorializing and some things, there are some other strategies. Toolbox is a thing that Lifestar puts out. This is a little book that has things like the 3-second rule. Research shows that if you get off of a pornographic site within 3 seconds, that chemical reaction is not going to kick in. There's things like flash forwarding. Kids will typically have fantasies that they think over and over with. If you can fast forward through that and think about the consequences of that instead of being embroiled in the fantasy, that can be of some great help. Just reading through books like Parenting with Teens and Love and Logic, Jill Manning's book, again, we're going to tout that book because it's a great way I learned a lot from that book when I read it. Pornography, the Great Lie, ends up really getting to kids. When it comes to therapists like ourselves, you've got to ask questions about us. Have you worked with this population? Have you done any recent studying about this population? Are you comfortable working with this population? Shop us around. Just because you got referred to one person that somebody said somebody's good about, shop us anyway. You can come in for a 10-minute interview, and if you don't like us, go somewhere else. That's possible. We're not fallible. I mean, we are fallible a lot of the time, and so we miss pieces. So some things when it comes to intervention are be savvy about who's out there that's working with these kids. If they don't have credentials, they may hurt you. We didn't mention self-help groups in here. I saw some Sons of Helaman guys that were attending earlier. That's a group where they're together with each other, LDS-based, that support each other with their sobriety. Sexaholics Anonymous can be powerful. The LDS Church has its own 12-step groups. There are other support pieces. People that are expecting to get help in just a couple of weeks, though, are going to be sadly disappointed by their expectations. This is a biochemical piece that ties in with emotions, and it's a long time to extinguish those behaviors, and relapse is a part of recovery for lots of people with this, including adolescents, because they had a great confession situation with you and hugged you and finally got all this stuff off their shoulders. It's only the beginning. There will be a relapse probably 3 weeks from there for lots of kids. Round number days are when they particularly have relapses. 6 months, 1 year, 5 years are times because you get kind of cocky with sobriety, and then other pieces can come in. Those are a few of the things here. We hope that we've been of some help to you today, and apologize for running over a little bit here.
Sorry.
Thanks very much.